The new patch in TFT has buffed one of the most useless and worthless carries all set long, Garen. This inspired many people to try and make Garen work for almost entire streams and days long, sacrificing hundreds of LP. In this episode of In Too Deep, we hop on board with Vanilla, one of the top performers from Set 9 in tournaments, who decided to play Garen Reroll against some of the best players in the servers like Wage and Iverson and K3 Soju. I will warn you though, after watching this video, you will likely try to queue on ladder and force Garen for yourself. But even if you do and lose LP, I promise you're gonna have so much fun. I guarantee it. Vanilla is currently competing in the Heartsteel Cup, which is one of the official qualifier circuits for North America. You top 4 in this cup, you get a spot in the regional finals. You top 4 regional finals, you go to the world championship. So it's a very big, important cup for Vanilla because he needs to put it all on the line in order to qualify for regionals. He's the only person that voted for Wandering Trainers, but we get crescendo. A lot of competitive players don't really want to play Wandering Trainer because there's a lot of variance in terms of what you get on your target dummy. But Vanilla is a player who's unafraid of taking that risk, so already you can tell that he's a bold player. Vanilla also is one of the best performing players from Set 9 in Runeterra Reforged, and so he comes in with Set 10 with a lot of expectation to potentially do well in these cups as well. All right, so we start off with a headliner bruiser with Tahm Kench. Tahm Kench is one of the weaker bruisers you can start off with because he doesn't give you a lot of offense and you need to build around him. He's kind of like a super target dummy in the sense that you kind of need to have a carry because he's a giant damage sponge. If you take Tahm Kench bruiser without a damage source, you could end up having a situation where you have too much defense and not enough offense. So I think this is a correct skip. Ends up picking up everything else in the shop. It's correct for him to buy everything out. Ends up getting a Vi 2, so he can use Vi as the carry. Had he known that was the case, possibly could have picked up Tahm Kench, but you don't know where you're going to hit in your next shop, so choose to skip it. And he's also skipping Superfan Kennen. A lot of players don't like going for Superfan Kennen unless they, 1, already have a damage source, kind of similar to Tahm Kench, but 2, also if they don't have something that links to Superfan. Does end up having that through the Nico, but chooses to pass it because it's a little bit too late. He's already committed to his pairs. Let's take a look at his augments. Stim Pack, Parting Gifts, and 1, 2s, 3. Stim Pack is something that's good for loose streaking if you feel like you can capitalize off the components. Really good for compositions that want to play multiple kinds of carries. So you're looking for Akali, Karthus, and Viego and Pentakill, for example. Country Reroll, another example that you want to go for Stim Pack because you want to itemize the Vex, the Samira, your front line, maybe items on Urgot. And so if you know what kind of composition that you want to lean into with, the rod tier and the glove, you could really pick up Stim Pack. And it's generically pretty strong for a silver in terms of the raw value of it. You get 4 components and you're eventually going to lose 50 HP. So I think that's a really good consideration. Parting Gifts is a little bit tricky to play around because you need to have an item that you're willing to pass around and you want to solo frontline a unit. The best Parting Gifts value situation we can get right now is something like Hand of Justice on a Vi. So that way when the Vi dies, she passes the Hand of Justice to somebody else. But that's not a really strong combination because not everybody really wants a Hand of Justice. A more generic way to play Parting Gifts is if you have something like Warmogs, because they just get a bunch of HP. You put it on a unit in the front by itself. That Warmogs unit dies, passes that Warmog to somebody else, and gets a little bit of that shield based on that max HP. That's a really good thing. So Parting Gifts is actually kind of an underrated augment in general because it could be really powerful with specific combos, but not really in this spot. 1, 2s, 3 is actually quite strong in general as a silver augment because you get a lot of gold, right? You can sell everything you can for 3 plus 4 plus another 3, so you get that free 10 gold. Plus, you have the opportunity of hitting really powerful champions for your traits. This is a really common thing to take, for example, if you're going for Heartsteel, because you can have a 3-cost champion that's really good, and maybe the Aphelios. And then you also have the possibility of playing for high tempo, because you get a 1-cost champion that potentially 2 stars, and then you just get a bunch of 2 stars. And then you can even sell things like the 2 and 3 costs and get a bunch of gold. And so 1, 2, 3 is like kind of a little bit of everything outside of items. You get tempo, so you can play like a strong early game. You get to make economy, and you get to also kind of fish for traits. So it's a really powerful silver augment. Rolls augments 1 and 2, Buried Treasures and Team Building. Buried Treasures is generically pretty solid as well because it just gives you generic item direction, almost like playing component anvils, the portal. So it's always a safe option to go for. Very solid. And then Team Building is if you know you want to commit to a reroll. We don't even necessarily have a good headliner right now, so how do we know what team building we want to pick? Team building is if you're just kind of saying like, I want to commit to some kind of reroll and I'll figure it out later. And that's a little bit risky for a player in his position right now. So I think Buried Treasures or 1-2-3 makes the most sense here. All right, so we pick up 1-2-3, and now we have Cassante as our headliner, which he's going to go for with Sentinels. And now you kind of see what happens with 1-2-3. He can sell like everything he doesn't want, or he could level and play a powerful unit like a Lulu, for example, or just kind of take it easy and evaluate based off what he hits, right? Because he does have things like a Seraphine and a Lulu, so he could end up holding on to it, maybe go into Spellweavers and kind of pick based off of his items because he has AP, so maybe he leans into Spellweaver reroll or maybe going into like Ari. It's all entirely possible. And that's the power of 1-2-3s. It gives him a ton of options. Interestingly enough, he doesn't choose to sell to make gold, and he doesn't level. So he chooses the most conservative option of not trying to sell here because he wants to keep his options open. A lot of times people just kind of sell and commit and say, hey, I have Cassante and I have, you know, this Hodge. Maybe I end up going for a Heartsteel setup. Maybe I end up going for like, you know, generic tempo and trying to play around like Karthus because I have, you know, dual gauntlet and a tier. There's a lot of different things you could think about, but Vanilla in this spot chooses to sell after losing. And I think this is actually a really important point. He chooses to sell because he recognizes that he's not going to try to play for a win streak. And so he doesn't have to play a strong headliner. A lot of times, if you're not choosing to play a headliner, you're going to be weaker early. And then the other element of it is that he knows that next turn he's going to level to 4 naturally because he's 4 out of 6. And so he gets the level 4 odds for headliners. And he could theoretically improve dramatically by having a 2-cost headliner show up in a shot. And this is leaning into momentum. That is the concept of TFT that you always have to think about. If you're winning, try to win more. If you're losing, you can keep on losing. And I think that's a really good application of recognizing that, hey, he's not necessarily fighting for a really powerful win streak early, and is just going to sell a lot of his headliners and try to make gold here. Now, that being said, it seems like in his mind, he's committing to things like Spellweavers in general. He is holding on to Garen and Cassante because those are Sentinels that can link to his front line. And in general, I think that Spellweaver Sentinels is something that is not played as commonly in the West. It's a lot more common that you see in like Southeast Asia, for example, because they actually do believe that Sentinel frontline is still pretty good. It's gotten nerfed, and ever since I think the holiday patch about a couple months ago, people are not really playing Sentinel Spellweavers anymore. But he's holding on to the possibility of maybe at least linking his front line right now. So he's holding on to his pairs, which I think is a good call. No buy of the shop, no slam of the items. Again, we're not necessarily trying to win here. We're just biding our time. But we are holding on to the possibility of being powerful by spiking. And so if we do get a powerful 2-cost headliner, for example, we'll be ready to go and try to put all these super fan units in and start to fight for a win streak. So in his mind, he's somewhat committed to 5 loss, but at the same time, he's willing to try to spike at any time and get really strong and try to go for that win streak. He picks up a Garen with a vest, and Garen with a vest is interesting because a lot of times people at this stage of the game are trying to figure out what their completed items are. So a lot of times people actually end up taking like a second tier and try to go for a blue buff, or they'd go for a belt and try to go for Morello. In this case, Vanilla ends up committing to a Archangels, which is fascinating because Archangels is not really a common item you prioritize. Usually tiers and rods are at a premium because the tiers end up making a mana generating item like Shojin, blue buff, adaptive, things of that sort. And rod is usually good for utility like a Morello and Ionic Spark and perhaps a Gunblade, or we want to go for just pure damage. Archangels is like a ramping type of effect, and it's not particularly good on Spellweaver units in general because Spellweavers already get a lot of AP. It's almost like Spellweaver the trait gives you Archangels by ramping a bunch of AP every single time you cast. And so this is an unusual slam. He does have a Garen pair, so the Archangels could theoretically be something that he's looking forward to play on Garen because Garen is a unit that does end up scaling with the amount of HP gain. Garen's ability says that every time he casts, he gets more max HP, and that scales with AP. So the more AP you give to Garen, the more HP he gets. The longer the fight goes, the more he scales. And then you get a very, very large and in-charge Garen. Okay, so we did get the 5 loss, and we played no headliner. So again, a little bit on the riskier side, and that's okay. Ooh, gets dropped a gold orb of gold. That's actually okay. I think a lot of times you would prefer something like a tome of traits, so you can get something really powerful and combine with like a nice emblem of some sorts. But I think that's okay because it looks like he wants to potentially go for reroll, and the more gold you have, the more you're able to kind of like play around those important breakpoint thresholds and roll more aggressively. So more gold is always nice. He ends up going to 6 here and then rolls one time to see if he can get a better headliner. He ended up skipping things like the Katarina, which would have been a good item holder, but right now he's playing around Seraphine, and he's probably looking to go for a Seraphine headliner. But again, Seraphine is a little bit weird with Archangels in general, and he does have that magnetic remover, so he does have options on what he ends up hitting and playing around based off that headliner that he gets. 3-2 augments come in. We got Capricious Forge, Sleight of Hand, and Know Your Enemy. Capricious Forge is interesting because it is something that you have to figure out like what is good with the random artifacts. The interesting thing about Capricious Forge is this slants a little bit more towards AP in general because you get things like Deathfire Grasp. If you get things like Mana Zane, which is better for casters, it could be good on some AD champions. In fact, it's really, really good on like Jhin, for example, as an AD carry, but in general, when you're trying to cast and spam cast, you're thinking about AP. Even things like Zhonya's, for example, also gives you AP as a base stat. So just think about Capricious Forge as being good with a lot of people who have mana and cast a lot and AP. And then also a mixture of like defensive items such as Anima Visage and Eternal Winter. So Capricious Forge is a little bit awkward. And that's why a lot of people, I think, shy away from it because they're like, I don't really know many units that are very, very good with it. But it's also a solid augment to play just on a generic AP fighter unit in general. So I think, for example, Capricious Forge is really good on Kayn. And that's something that you can like always think about. Sleight of Hand is also just generic. It gives you Thief's Gloves and it gives you Tempo right now, because if you have a good 2-star unit, you could just put Sleight of Hand on it. And you always can use things like health and attack speed. It's just generic, kind of like Twin Terror. You always want health and attack speed on every champion. Who doesn't want that? Know Your Enemy helps him get more damage, which is something that his composition is probably not going to lack right now. If you look at it, he has Spellweavers and he has Archangels. And I think in general, he's just kind of lacking like quality across the board. And then the other element of it is, do you think that the rest of the lobby is going to be playing a lot of the same traits that he has? If you're going for like Superfan and Sentinels, chances are a lot of people are going to be playing that kind of trait. So I think Know Your Enemy is okay. I also think I'm okay with rerolling like all these options. Like all of them are like okay, and none of them are like particularly outstanding. But he probably is going to hold on to one of these options just to be safe. Rolls options 1 and 3, and we have Twin Terror and Idealism. Twin Terror is pretty interesting because you could think about going for Twin Terror Lulu based off his Spellweavers. I think that he unfortunately slammed things like the Rod and the Tear already, so that makes the Archangels a lot worse. Lulu wants mana and not ability power, so that's a little bit unfortunate here. Idealism is also, well, unfortunate because he slammed his Rod and his Tear, so he doesn't have the ability to make double Hand of Justice. So I think that Idealism is also a little bit awkward. And you have to think about like, what would be a good use of Archangels and Hand of Justice in this spot? A very unusual combination. And Idealism is a lot better with like fighters. You're looking at like Zed and Viego and any other melee champions that really kind of get in the mix. Range carries are a little bit less likely to use Hand of Justice because they don't really care nearly as much about the Omnivamp, at least not inherently as a selfish trait. And so Idealism is a little bit awkward here. So I think Sleight of Hand makes the most sense. Sleight of Hand is the choice, and we're rolling. We hit Garen 2, and we hit a Sentinel. Echo is actually quite good here because he was lacking like kind of that durable front line, and now he hits things like the Garen. With 4 Garens into the mix, we're going to start itemizing Garen. So here we go. We are off to the races, and it looks like we are fully committed to a Garen reroll. The really interesting thing here is that we can go for Echo currently as our headliner, but we can actually sell Echo later on and try to go for a 3-star Garen and chase the headliner Garen. So in our minds right now, we have Echo temporarily, which is good. And then we can try to sell Echo later on to go for, the 7th effective Garen and then eventually go for Garen 3. But then the other side of it is that we could also just stay on Echo because as far as I know, and, again, don't quote me on this because I'm not a Garen reroll expert 100% yet because I'm still learning it. But I believe that Sentinel is the better trait that you want. So if you do end up selling like the Echo here, and then you want to go for Garen, you get 8-bit Garen, which is not necessarily bad, but the only unit it benefits is Garen, and the 6th Sentinel ends up benefiting the entire team. So I think that there's a little bit inherent risk of trying to play this line and then thinking like, hey, I'm going to sell this and go for Garen 3. You end up going for like an 8-bit Garen because you just have to buy it. It's the first headliner that you hit. And then you don't really have like the trait structure that really supports what makes this really powerful because we're trying to go for Sentinels and Spellweavers. We're going for Ahri and Lulu Carry, and they just need as much F frontline as possible. And Garen is going to try to provide that frontline. Vanilla's going immediately for this cloak, so he can go for a Bloodthirster onto Garen if he wants. Bloodthirster is really good because it scales off the HP that you have. The more HP you have, the better shield you get. And it gets a little bit of AP now, so maybe Bloodthirster ends up being good. Also, there's another benefit that Vanilla's picking up another Echo. And now he's in an interesting spot where he actually has 5 Echoes and 5 Garens. So now I'm leaning the other way now. Like, we have as many Echoes as we do Garens. And, you know, we could try to sell this Echo, but maybe we end up going for Echo 3. Scouts around and sees one player holding Echoes at the moment. No one else looks like they're playing Echo. And that's pretty unusual. Usually Echo is really powerful of a unit that links a lot of superfan lines together. So people are often buying him. And even just as a good unit to just play in your front line. But in this kind of rare instance, he's looking at potentially playing Echo 3 and Garen 3. We're on a 3 streak right now, so things are looking good at 3-6 for Vanilla. Studying and trying to scout around positioning. He does want to make sure Echo is in front of the carry. Another thing to think about is how you're actually getting Echo in front of the units that are dealing the most damage, because Echo has that AoE stun range. And so if he's able to get in front of like the, the Riven or other melee carries are really important. Future Zeds, for example, always try to make sure that, Echo CC is really powerful and locks in on any unit that's trying to get past that front line quickly. The irony is he doesn't have any backline to protect, actually. The unit that he's trying to carry is Garen and Akali. So it's not like you need to protect them because they're always into the fray anyways. He has no backline DPS. And so it's not nearly as important right now. He levels to 7 because the odds for 3 cost improve, and the odds for 2 cost for Garen is 35%. And also he has improved his odds of 4 cost for 10%. And so this is actually a really important note for if you're ever rerolling a composition that wants access to 4 costs and you're rolling for 2 and 3s. Level 7 is better, even though we're trying to go for a Garen 3 and the maximum odds is at level 6. You don't lose that much for going to 7 here. Now we're rolling, and how deep do we roll is the question. We hit a 6th Echo, and we could stop here. Is he thinking about selling Blitzcranks as well and kind of ditching the Sentinel plan because he does have Akali pair? We're also playing True Damage Akali. Okay, so he ends up being a little indecisive, and he commits to playing Twisted Fate as the Morello and Gunblade holder. This has to be temporary because Twisted Fate doesn't really scale with Disco nearly as well. Although he does have an interesting Disco line because he could actually end up playing Sentinels and Disco. Blitzcrank is a Sentinel, for example, so could lean into that. Loses against Twitch 3 with a bunch of reroll augments. Take a look at the 4-2 augments here. So New Recruit, Harmless 3, and Lucky Gloves. The first thing that's standing out to me is we have Sleight of Hand. We have a pair of Thieves Gloves already. We can get Lucky Gloves value. The other is New Recruit because it lets us get a Champion Duplicator. So we're going to hit the reroll and we get to expand our team. So we can tie in everything. A lot of times when you're playing a vertical, having that +1 allows you to tie in a lot of really nice traits together. So sometimes you have to go do I choose between KDA, Superfan, the extra Spellweaver Breakpoint, and 6 Sentinel? New Recruit allows you to fit into everything. We're also at low HP, 48, so it's a little bit hard to kind of play a little bit slow here. So New Recruit helps us hit that 3-star really quickly. Ends up rolling the other 2 options and has Unleashed Arcana and Roll the Dice. And if we're going to pick a Thieves Gloves augment, I think Lucky Gloves makes the most sense because we have Sleight of Hand. So I think this one is fairly straightforward, nothing too complicated. Ends up selling the Kennen and going for the Thieves Gloves onto the Echo. And this is pretty smart because Superfan and Thieves Gloves don't really interact very kindly. If you do have a Thieves Gloves item, you can't really put it on the Superfan unit very easily unless you want to give up the Superfan item. So now that he knows that he's going to be committing to it, he instead chooses to go for double Thieves Gloves on the 2 Echoes because they're 2 of his best units. And he doesn't need to go for Thieves Gloves on his backline because he has Morello and Gunblade. And he can go for a 3rd Thieves Gloves with this extra glove that he got off the augment. So all of a sudden, this board looks pretty respectable. It's 6 Sentinel. But we're lacking that Spellweaver ramp, so it's a little bit unfortunate that we're not able to kind of get the 6 Sentinel and the Spellweaver, so Lu's not getting that scaling AP. But just look at how durable his frontline is, and the more durable everyone else is, right? He has another Echo 2 that is also protecting his Garen. This Archangels is giving so much AP. So, it's not like he doesn't have his damage source or his scaling source. This Garen is actually unkillable and getting so much HP. He doesn't sell because he doesn't want to give up this Ahri. The Ahri ends up being his next unit that he can play. Kind of stuck in this awkward spot where I think he would want to play this Ahri over a Sentinel, but he doesn't want to give up 6 Sentinel. Maybe in another world, if he didn't immediately slam his Thieves Gloves, he could have put like Ari with Thieves Gloves in or another unit, and then have 6 Sentinel with the Spellweaver. So perhaps a slightly rushed decision because he got like, oh, I have 2 Echoes and it's good to play for the itemization. He could have maybe put the other Echo 2 on the bench and tech this Ari in for a little bit more damage, because I do think his front line is the best part of his comp and he has a little bit too much of it. That being said, I love the fact that he's leaning into the Garen. He is struggling to kill this Zed, kind of a lack of DPS. As we are seeing, the fight is stalling for 27, 20, 29 seconds. We're going to overtime, and we barely did a dent into like a strong Zed, Heartsteel board. So we're lacking DPS for sure. Vanilla goes for another Cloak. For Declaw. We didn't go for things like that Bloodthirster a while back. Now we save this Cloak and we go for Dragon's Claw. The main benefit that people think about Dragon's Claw is to just be very strong against a bunch of AP damage. But the other benefit that people don't really think about is you get a bunch of HP, right? You get like 10% max HP, I believe, from Dragon's Claw. So you're just giving more and more HP to this Garen and trying to feed into that win condition. And the more HP you have, the more effective it is, because 6 Sentinel gives you resistances to convert off of it. Wow, we just hit an Echo 3, so we are able to actually get everything in finally. And we also sold a Lulu because we want to play around Seraphine as our KDA. And KDA is also a nice benefit because on top of the ADAP, guess what we get? Highest answer on the board, max HP. So Garen 3 with a bunch of HP plus the KDA gives us a lot of HP. And this Garen is now scaling. Look at how many bars he's getting off these Archangel's casts. Holy crap, it's just turning into a straight up barcode. As we were spectating, we saw that Garen was getting 8,000 to 9,000 HP on the tournament co-stream. And the Garen, for each bar that's above his head, I believe is like 250 HP or something like that, like somewhere in the 200, 300 HP. And so right now, Garen has, like 2,000 HP. But as he's starting to scale with the number of bars, it just gets higher and higher amount of HP. And it really starts to put in your mind how ridiculous this Garen starts to be. And also, he's going up against AP comp. So, this Ari trying to nuke the Garen is so unsuccessful. Usually, you're really afraid of, the AP units locking onto the Garen. But if they're not able to burst him down early in the fight, halfway through, he's just going to continue to scale and gets way out of control. Yeah, be careful of who you make fun of in middle school, because this is just a Garen 2, by the way. This Garen, once he graduates college, he's about to get a whole big glow up and get to Garen 3, and will start to be really unstoppable. Sells the Seraphine for 2 gold, and we hit the Garen 3, and we get another glove for Thieves Gloves. So we can go for another Sentinel frontline. We actually could think about whether or not we want to potentially hold for another backliner. Actually, that doesn't make sense, because at level 8, I'm pretty sure that we're just going to put in a utility unit here. Like level 8, you could put in a Ziggs for, a little bit of shred, because we don't have things like Spark or Shiv. And that's a really far time away. Plus, we do have the magnetic remover, so we can remove the Thieves Gloves and put on a unit later. So I think it makes sense. Also, he has Titans remaining as his last item. And out of all the Sentinels that can use Titans, I believe Mordecai is one of the best, because he's quite robust with the amount of items that you can put on him, and Titans ends up being quite solid to scale his offensive stats. Oh my goodness. And we hit a Blitzcrank too. And it's funny because you're like, okay, well, he's, hitting everything. But, these are units that people aren't contesting in the lobby. Like, not a lot of people are playing Disco. Not a lot of people are playing Garen. And actually, only one person was holding Echo. So now he has Garen 3, Echo 3, Blitzcrank. And now all of a sudden, like going up against Soju and Wage and Iverson, like you're looking at the names of the people in the lobby, he's higher HP than them, and now he's starting to outscale a lot of these boards. Going up against a Heartsteel board with Ezreal too, although it's not necessarily the strongest because it is Lucian, but his opponent has a bunch of scaling 3 Rage Blades, but it just doesn't do anything against the 6 Sentinel board, and they're doing no damage whatsoever, and this Garen just continues to ramp. Ezreal is just tickling Garen at this point. This is crazy. Like you can't help but laugh at this point because of like it doesn't feel like a real comp, but at the same time he is crushing real comps. And I think the hardest part of the game has been cleared. All he has to do is try his best to protect his backline, because it does look like Garen is the ultimate win condition. I do think you want to try to protect this Ari because it ramps up the team AP every single time she's casting. The Spellweaver is ramping, and also the longer you can protect things like the Seraphine, the more you're providing anti-heal, and the anti-heal doesn't last forever, so you do want to drag the fight out a little bit. So positioning does kind of still matter a little bit. You can see that he's trying to put like the Blitzcranks and the Echoes in front of the relevant carries. Now we're going up against the Zed board that before we got clobbered because we didn't have enough DPS, But now we have Garen 3 and Echo 3. And this is still a really, really scary board because they have so much damage and resistances. But it looks like it's way closer this time at least. And you see what's going on here. The Lucian is actually attacking the Ahri because of the lack of frontline covering her. And now we lost one of our damage sources. And so yeah, actually positioning still really does matter at this phase of the game. It's a little bit hard to predict because when you have these sentinels moving and shifting a little bit over, it ends up being a little bit of the fight RNG, the fight variance that you can't really anticipate. But I think if he had his Echo, for example, where the Mordekaiser was in the middle, that might have actually been something that swung the fight. And I was going for Sunfire, which is actually a little bit surprising. I think I would have liked to pick Spark here. We don't have anti-magic resistance, and we do already have Morello, so I think that this is not necessarily the best pick. In his mind, he probably thinks that Sunfire is okay to have because his Seraphine is getting picked off, and sometimes he needs that anti-heal late in the fight. He goes to level 8, and now he's rolling. He ends up taking in a Lulu, but I think he is looking for a Ziggs. It's kind of hard to hit that Ziggs at this point. But I don't think he's going to be able to get to 9 because he's at 20 HP. The rest of the lobby is very close. Going up against the Executioners of Ramkev, who now have an 3-star Vex and a Emo Karthus. But the Executioners just can't burst down the Sentinels fast enough. Executioner's win condition is to win very fast. And Sentinels, the first 10 seconds of the fight, have that double resistances. So they are very, very tanky for that early burst. Now we end up scouting and switching, trying to get our tankiest unit in front of this Riven, which is really big. Echo CC is not going to be as valuable because Banshee's is keeping that Riven safe, so we don't have that CC with the Echo. We do have a lot of things focusing onto it. Garen, Ahri, and Seraphine are locked in. Riven does have a ton of things going for her, but she is going to fall, and now I think the rest of the team is lacking damage, and we just beat a souped-up Riven 3. Banshees, Edgelord emblem, so we have more Edgelords than usual. We do have the Cybernetic Bulk and Vampirism. That is a very, very strong Riven 3. And I think that if we even did one extra step of having Ahri 2 and had her locked onto the Riven from the get-go by putting her into A1 or D1 rather, this would have been very, very good. And we are in that top 5. I do believe Soju has 10 KDA, by the way, and 10 KDA is insanely strong. So I don't think Vanilla's going to win this lobby, unfortunately. 10 KDA is way too good. Talk about outscaling. The KDA is just ridiculous, giving you a bunch of mana. We hit the Ziggs, and now we can transfer our items over to Ziggs. So that has been kind of our game plan for a while. And Vanilla is looking to go to 9. He actually does have enough gold. I was thinking earlier we couldn't get to 9 because we wanted to roll for Ahri and that Ziggs. But 10 KDA for Soju is going to be very, 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 very hard to beat. I think Soju just wins this lobby and we queued up into him. I think that HP that we preserved is actually so big because this 10 KDA could actually just straight up kill us. Oh my gosh, this fight is not looking very close at all. We have so much HP to chew through on this Poppy with KDA. Poppy uses KDA very, very well because she loves that HP scaling. Oh, we end up barely surviving by 1 HP. Oh my gosh, if we lost by 1 unit in any direction during this game, we would have gone probably a 4th, which I guess is okay, but because of that, we're now top 3. Don't let anyone ever tell you that 1 unit doesn't matter in TFT. So we go to 9 now. It's a natural interval, 0 out of 84. We tech in another Lulu, and we replace the Seraphine with KDA. It's okay. The 2 hyper pop is actually the really big difference because then we can get this attack speed scaling onto our back line. But I think at this point, we're just hoping that we can play for a second. And now we're going up against the Ghost. We successfully have outlisted the Riven player. Greya is dead. And just like that, we are top 2 with 6 Sentinel, Garen 3 as our main game plan. I mean, we're stuck on Ahri 1. If we were able to hit Ahri 2, Ziggs 2, I still think we lose to 10 KDA. Soju looks way too strong at this point. And so our job is done. Here we go, the last fight of the game. This should be a Soju win. He has actually successfully transferred over from Poppy 2 to now Alawi 2. So definitely nothing is dying on this board. I don't think Ahri 1 could clean up to this. I actually don't even know if he's able to somehow get Ahri 3. I don't know if she would win this fight, but it's not like he could get that anyways because Soju had a KDA going. Very impressive game by Vanilla. Just saw the pedigree that was in the lobby. You have Wajan Iverson, one of the top 3 players in North America, alongside Setsuko and Dirsoap. You have Soju. I know you guys like to meme him, but in reality, in tournament Soju is a completely different beast than he is on ladder. Takes it very seriously, very strong. And then Ramkev, who's made it to the World Championship. Deepe, who's a regionals player. So he's able to hold his own and show off, one, why he is considered to be a very fearless and kind of a woke for fun player at times, going for these crazy lines. And two, why he was able to put up some of those results against the best players and be an inspiration for all those people that love to grind, but also play off meta. What did you guys think of Vanilla's play? Was that Garen Reroll not entertaining at all? It was super fun. If you love Garen Reroll, check out my Garen gameplay on the highlights channel. It's the second channel for my own highlights and whatnot. That's not necessarily like educational guide stuff on this one. You can go check out in the link and description. We just passed 1K subs. Thank everyone who supported that channel. Hopefully we can get a lot more rolling into set 11 and beyond. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.